Welcome to a new episode of the MVP Podcast. We talk hustle, business, content creation, athletics, and entrepreneurship.
Every day I'm hustling.
The MVP Podcast,
Let's go,
starts now.
Because yeah,
there's Alex.
Yeah,
hey,
yeah, there he
it
is.
said he wasn't working. What's up, John?
What's going on, bud?
Let me mute my TV.
But,
I'm watching Pitt, Mosey.
Oh, there we go.
Pitt men's basketball?
Yeah, they're about to win. I took them -12 though. They were supposed to blow out Georgia Tech tonight. They didn't blow them out.
They better give them the ranking after this if they win.
I don't know how they haven't given them a ranking yet.
I know it's unbelievable. I don't get it.
Yeah, but no, I did take Arkansas tonight. So John, you don't.
There you go.
If they lose tonight, blame me.
Good.
Yeah, but must bust.
Did Josh or Alex tell you saw me at the Kings game on TV?
No, I don't think he
Did I
did.
send that to you, Josh? He was on the Kings television station at halftime.
Really?
That's incredible.
I was with a buddy, and I'd never been to an NBA game before, and he says, he's like, you wanna try to get on TV? And I was like, sure. And he's like, we'll go stand behind the announcers. We'll leave about 3 minutes before the half or whatever. So I ran up. We ran up there and got a spot, and I texted Alex to say, turn your TV on. I don't know if it's going to work, but turn your TV on, and he did. You can see me just jumping up and down going nuts. Yeah.
Light the beam.
Yeah, light
That's
the beam.
awesome.
That's sweet.
That was a pretty fun night.
All
But
right,
John,
well,
you were
it's
saying
working.
that stream was they were trying to make it a national stream, and
Right, so
with not letting them fish.
Right, so the way some of these I call them like blue ribbon trout waters. So basically, like the Truckee River, for example, it's a cool one to kind of look up. But usually, there's different times of the year that you can fish, and that has to do with when the fish are spawning, because you don't want to disturb the fish when they're trying to mate and lay their eggs. And that's a whole process. It's a very sensitive time. So essentially, when they made the change to no longer stock it, to rely on the natural processes to keep the fish sustained in there, Cal Fish and Wildlife, they didn't change the regs because this was a personal decision of like whoever's on the board of that river in that community.
So politics got involved.
Right, so they didn't request that change. So like theoretically and legally, December through March 1st, I can go fish it whenever I want to, and nobody can tell me no. But on that stretch, the locals there are pretty adamant about it. So it's funny because I've been exploring a lot out here because it's so new to me. But you start learning about the different cliques and politics of people, and you kind of, even though I couldn't fish it, I was like, okay, I'm just going to stay away and not, wait till March rolls around to avoid the confrontation. But,
Right. I'm sure the people of the town probably get like defensive over it almost at certain points because they're trying to protect it.
Right, and I also see the value in it. Like, just, it makes sense. Like if it's a spawn and like they're having a hard time, they're trying to get the fish back in there. Like I have no problem in waiting, and plus I guess we only have 10 more days.
It's coming up. It gets
So
busy up here in New Wilmington too, John. I'm by is that your guys' grandma collectively, Josh?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so they go crazy down there at Neshannock. Have you ever fished down there, John?
Yeah, Neshannock Creek. I haven't fished Neshannock Creek yet. And I always talk about it. I have some hats and I think a shirt from there, from the fly shop, the little water shop down there. I always talk about doing it, but every time I've come out there, I think it's been, the last time, what was that? That was in the summer, but I don't think I had fishing gear with me. But then the past few times was around Thanksgiving time, which I can't remember. I think it's too cold then. I can't remember. I know there's a seasonal thing there too.
Oh, yeah.
I grew up in Arkansas. It's primarily stocked. There's a few live fish, but few natural wild populations that make it through the summer. But for the most part, they're all stocked. So we don't really have a season. Like I can fish theoretically year round if I can find them, but there's
and it isn't 20 degrees whenever you're trying to go in the winter time too.
Right. That's what makes Arkansas kind of amazing for that is in February, that's prime time trout fishing because it's colder. Nothing's really frozen on the rivers, to be honest. But just because of the, our cold is not the same as y'all's cold.
Right.
So you can, my dad was telling me he used to be in the, I think it was the Philadelphia Anglers Club, and he said he used to hear stories about how Arkansas was a hidden gem, and people would actually fly to Arkansas to fish these small streams just because you could fish it in the what you would consider off season up north. Yeah, because we stock it, and it's warm enough, cold enough that it's good, and warm enough that it's fishable. So
that's awesome. Very cool. Yeah. We were on a little fishing tangent there before even like talking our intro and John into the podcast. I was curious though. Hey, I saw the Instagram. Yeah. Comment on it.
It's a really neat place.
We're off and running with this program. We got Alex in here. Alex, I got you muted right now, just so you know, because there's a little background noise at the fan. But whenever you want to talk, just chat or something, and I'll unmute you.
Yeah, it gets hot as hell.
Oh, you can unmute yourself. Never mind. You're good.
Yeah.
But this is, I don't even know what episode this is technically, but we're not going to talk about the episode number. But today we have my cousin John Veon, and he's a PhD student at the University of California, Davis, studying wildlife, fish, and conservation biology. Did I get that correct?
You did, yeah. So I'm in the wildlife, fish, and conservation biology department, and my PhD is in ecology, but with a focus on integrated wetland management. Yep.
Nice. So let's just start with what you currently are up to. Let's just start with what you're currently up to and like how you got to this point in the first place, because it's been a pretty long journey as well.
Right. Yeah. So it's like trying to think back to the the origin of where some of this stuff started, but I guess I'll start with what I'm currently doing. So I'm at UC Davis, as we call it, and it's really cool place. It's a really great ecology program and wildlife school. It's an agricultural school, so it's you've got everything from dairy to groundbreaking science and rice fields, and it's just it's pretty amazing. The stuff that they're exploring here. But naturally, we have that, what we call WFCB, the Wildlife, Fish, and Conservation Biology Department. And there's wildlife professors or fisheries professors from, I'm talking pumas to rainforest ecologists to people who study the migratory salmon out here, and then, of course, me, waterfowl and wetlands. But there's my professor, John Eady. He is a long-time and renowned waterfowl scientist, wetland ecologist, or waterfowl and wetland ecologist, and basically he is very interested in, taking ecological theories, so these concepts that we see in different systems, and picking them apart to see like what, kind of like a clock, so like what gears of the clock are turning the hands, and so taking that and taking the theory and then taking an applied approach. How can we use it to manage wildlife? So that's the kind of program that he runs. He focuses waterfowl and wetlands. And so I had an opportunity through a former mentor of mine that actually was in his lab in the early 2000s. Had basically called me one day that there was an opportunity at UC Davis to get a wetland background, which is what I wanted. I have my previous histories in waterfowl science, or with my master's work that I did, and I can get into that in a minute. But yeah, so I wanted a bigger ecological base and a bigger wetland base, so I could kind of understand that whole system. That I study waterfowl so much, I want to be able to know how to manage its habitat. So basically, the project was, out here, what's a huge issue is mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are a huge issue all over the place, but here it's so urbanized in terms of you got a bunch of people. Some people will go as far as to say overpopulated, but you've got a lot of urbanization, so a lot of city areas. And this was a big floodplain where you have the Sacramento River, the Feather River, some of these large rivers that basically would flood over and create all these pockets of wetlands, and then would drain out and recede. But that was kind of the natural thing, and that's why they had this migratory salmon out here that would go up into the foothills and breed and then die up there, and then their young would go back out to the ocean. All of that has wildly changed. There's a lot of conservation involved, but as a result, as people have settled and moved out here with agriculture and just primarily living out here, we're in a situation now where mosquitoes are huge vectors for disease, and people don't want to get bit by mosquitoes all the time. So essentially, it's finding a balance of living with these wetlands that are oh so important for a variety of reasons. For they're nature's filters, so they filter all the toxins, all the runoff, even stuff in the system that needs to different. I think about like carbon in our system, that you hear about carbon and climate change all the time. Wetlands can actually store that. They can store carbon. So really important, but mosquitoes are a byproduct. And so my goal is to basically find a way that we can manage for mosquitoes, but keep water in these wetlands. Right now, the quote unquote best management practice, called the BMP, is to essentially drain these wetlands periodically. You drain them all the way out, and they go dry, and then you flood them again. But what happens is you get these ops of mosquitoes. Counterintuitively, you get these ops of mosquitoes. So basically, mosquitoes hatching from egg, turning to a larva, and then flying out of the wetland. And that requires a lot of pesticide use, and fogging is what they do for adult mosquitoes. And downstream, that's kind of my main the kind of the origin of my project. But I'll eventually take a more route onto the trophic effects. So how does this affect duckling survival when we have more drained wetlands, versus if we can find ways to more use more ecology or ecological concepts to manage for mosquitoes with, like, let's say, native predators such as macroinvertebrates in the water that are native to the region, as opposed to using pesticides or shipping over invasive fish that are used to control these mosquitoes. It doesn't always end well. But yeah, so I'm basically studying the different networks of organisms in wetlands. How might we tweak that clock to try and keep the water on the wetlands, reduce mosquitoes, and then see the downstream goods and services from that for both humans and wildlife.
Nice. What does your class schedule look like then for some of these activities? Are you mainly just out in the field, just experimenting and seeing what's going on in these wetlands?
Right. So, how grad school kind of works is like you have a field season. So typically when you're studying, your study system has a certain time frame at which you go out and collect samples. And for me, that is late spring all the way through the summer. So I go about probably May through September 1st in terms of field work. And so what I do is, once water starts going onto the wetlands, they do these irrigations, so they'll flood up the entire wetland. And I go out on every fourth day, because that's when you would see peak growth theoretically in mosquito larvae. And we sample. So we go out and collect samples with nets in the mud, essentially. So we'll do that we'll bounce around, do that as much as we can between the units, and then we're collecting other data too. So that's primarily May through the end of the summer. Okay. The quarter here, we're on a quarter system, so we have the fall, winter, spring, and summer. So they're 4 10-week sets of sets of classes, but most people don't take classes in the summer quarter. So this spring quarter that's coming up, which will be mid-March through early to mid-June, I will have a little bit of overlap with field work, but the majority of my field work through up till December or up till September, sorry, will be, not have to do classes during that time period.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, question about the mosquitoes. I'm like sitting here thinking, now, whenever you guys are doing this research, is there a goal in mind to kind of help solve the mosquito problem of sorts, to like try and fix the overpopulation of the mosquitoes in the area?
Right. So there's, and it's funny because we have different entities out here. You've got California Department of Fish and Wildlife, who manages state lands. You've got, and then wetlands on those areas, and then you've got private landowners, which is the ranch I primarily work on. It's called Bird Haven Ranch, and that's where we're doing a lot of this work. And then you also have mosquito vector control, so they're in charge by county of all the regulation of the spraying and ensuring that we don't have these large concentrations of mosquito larvae. So that's where they come in. So in terms of like overall goals, I think the interesting piece here is that I'd say that the broad goal is all parties want to keep wetlands around. I think everybody really wants to keep wetlands around. I think the difference is everybody has different jobs to do. In terms of a specified goal, my personal goal would be to keep wetlands on the landscape, but also reduce the human wildlife conflict or the human insect conflict of humans coming into contact with mosquitoes or mosquito-borne illnesses. I always say that we will not get rid of mosquitoes completely.
Yeah. Isn't there something crazy
they're gonna be
like
around.
Billions or trillions of mosquitoes out in the world right now?
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know
total
like,
number
the
wise.
Exact
Yeah.
numbers, and
there's a lot. There's a lot.
Can vary. Yeah, and the different species. So there's different groups of taxonomic species that are responsible for the different types of illnesses. So out here, the Aedes mosquito, although there's certain diseases it can transmit with wildlife. It's more of what we call the nuisance mosquito. So it's the one that if you get bit in the summer repetitively, like that's the one that nests in the mud, and when you have these big swaths of mosquitoes hatch out, that's usually what it is. Culex is the one that is more responsible for a lot of the human transmitted diseases. They put less energy into reproduction and more into survival. So if you get bit during the winter, that's usually a problem. That's usually the Culex mosquito, or usually another variant that's similar to it that can go dormant through the winter, so they live longer. The floodwater ones put more energy into reproduction, but they don't survive as long. So yeah,
makes sense. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Now, how much have you seen mosquitoes affect like wildlife such as like trout and you said you're into studying of like mallards and different duck species, correct?
Right. So we're, in terms of the disease stuff, we're we don't plan to really do any like disease analytics. There are some venues to possibly do that down the line. We're going to look at some different types of DNA techniques to look at who's eating who with different gut contents of bugs, and to try and what we call build the network or the feeding guilds, the community structures out there. But in terms of like how the mosquitoes directly affect the organisms, that really won't be a part of our question base. I do think that mosquitoes do play a role in the network of those organisms. I definitely think that trout, if a mosquito lands on top of the water, is going to go up and eat it.
He's hungry.
And so those are parts. Yeah, right. And I have a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest from several people already that I'm already interested in looking at, that ducklings, because they're so curious and hungry, they eat a lot of proteins that grow really fast when they're young. Kind of like as a kid, as a child, there's certain vitamins when you're growing really fast that you need. So for ducks, they need amino acids to build up their muscles. So they're eating a lot of bugs, a lot of proteins, and I've already heard anecdotal evidence from several people that the ducklings key in on the larva because they wiggle around and they look like almost like pepper flakes wiggling. So I'm interested to see like how they play a role. as much as we want to get rid of them too, we also should understand what's their role out here. Like what gears are they turning? And if you remove mosquitoes in high densities, does that change not only the structure of the bugs out there, but does that change, the diet of certain terrestrial animals as well? So
yeah, no, that's huge. I was listening to a podcast today too on a guy that was talking on the Rogan podcast about how much bats play a crucial role in eating mosquitoes, and I never even realized that at nighttime. Like that's what bats go after, and thought that was super interesting.
Right. So so it's funny, yeah. So with the bats thing, because I've dug into this, bats don't. So what's interesting is bats have their mosquitoes don't make up their primary diet. They will eat them, but they don't prefer to eat mosquitoes. Reason I say this is because I looked into this as a potential organism to consider. If you increase wetlands, do you get increased predation by bats on mosquitoes? And apparently some people have looked into some of that stuff. Anyways, I have some good some friends. I actually have a really good friend that was in Africa researching bats. She may still be there right now, but
wow.
But yeah, she would be a really good person to ask that.
Talk about the bat talks.
Yeah.
Right.
What would you say? Right. What would you say is like your favorite part of what you do?
Gosh, I would say, getting to be a part of something that is it's an ongoing effort to protect something that's bigger than myself, and also with a community of people who also believe that same thing and work together. So when I think about the waterfowl community, everybody kind of knows everybody. I was just emailing with a guy from Mississippi State today. I met at a conference. There's people I know out in Colorado. There's somebody I know in Canada just from doing reviews and seeing each other's names. And, it's kind of funny because you'll see names come up on papers when you're researching and reviewing. And, you build a network and everybody has like-minded interests. Everybody has their own little expertise. And what's really cool is seeing tons of people come together, or not even come together on one project, but seeing a reference list is pretty neat because you can see all these different expertise and studies that kind of come together to help fill a gap of knowledge that now has advanced the frontier conservation for a specific species or for an entire ecosystem. And that has incredible implications towards policy, as well as our giant management plan. So like John Eady, for example, my advisor, he helped write the North American Waterfowl Management Plan.
Wow.
And it was a big part of that effort. And it's pretty cool to be able to just, to be like, oh, I'm his student, right? Like I see him in the hall and I chat with him all the time and I'm like, and he'll joke. He won't make a big deal of it, but
he got an act passed
so
in
cool.
Congress. That's awesome.
Right. So, well, it's like, it's hilarious because you go and see on that plan like the signatures from Secretary of State and stuff like that, and it's
incredible.
It's just cool to be a part of something like that, and also know because I always talk about I'm a big hunter. And that has implications towards my relationship with wildlife and nature. And so being able to say that I got to help protect that thing that drives me every single day is a very rewarding experience. So.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Have you it's all the way on the West Coast, so I don't know how well it's been covered out there, but have you seen any of the train derailment stuff from Ohio out there? Any of the coverage on that?
Right.
East Palestine.
Right. Yeah, so I've been getting tidbits here and there about, mainly on Google, trying to keep up with it, all the different news networks that I follow. So yeah, I'm familiar with it. I'm not as in it as much as y'all are.
A little bit closer.
But I have been. Yeah, but I have been trying to keep up with it, and I have been kind of, looking at the wildlife sides of it. It actually came up I lead a wetland seminar here on campus once a week, and it actually came up today actually in one of our talks.
It's sad, especially with the creek. I mean, Josh sent me a video probably 2 or 3 days ago, or was it 4 or 5 days ago, of a lady that was walking up and down the stream, just recording all of the creek chubs and like suckers that were just coming up, just washed up dead. And it's just like, what do you do kind of whenever it gets to the point where it's into the water system? We were sitting here talking about it, like, we have no idea, and as a guy that's studying it right now, I'm sure that you probably have a lot of concerns with it, especially with they said that livestock and stuff were showing up dead like 2 or 3 days ago too.
Right. So, and I'll give purely my opinion, because I have also found it's pretty interesting when this stuff happens, because there's a lot of political stuff that happens that generates from it that I jokingly say it makes it difficult for a scientist, because you're trying to figure out what's going on. You also want to do it as quick as possible, but that's also not how nature works. Nature also throws curveballs. Mm-hmm. So you battle this line, because I think one of the big things I've been hearing about is where it hasn't been being covered. And that could be for a multitude of reasons, but just from a purely scientist standpoint, I was reflecting and playing devil's advocate with it. And, normally
you almost have to.
Right. So you have there's stuff called preliminary data. So you collect stuff and you release preliminary data. One of the things we run the risk of when we release preliminary data is somebody interpreting that and then running with it. And because preliminary means that it's not official yet, that means it could change. And so I think trying to apply myself in that situation, I'm not a policy person or an on-the-ground environmental protection agency person, but I'm sure, I could only imagine the level of shock when something like that happened. It seemed like the governor of Ohio said that the state was unaware that train was coming through with all those chemicals from what they were being told, which is also like, it seems like a classic miscommunication and, window of opportunity for something bad to happen, and it happened.
Yep.
And it's very unfortunate from a scientific side or a wildlife side, because now you got a situation where I was looking at the list of chemicals today. It was blowing my mind. It was all these chemicals that are made for PVC, stuff that goes into paint. It was blowing me away. Like, and that was just only a few of the train cars. I thought I saw like 5 or 6 different chemicals, and one of them is supposed to be temperature controlled, which is why they had to do like a controlled explosion or whatever of the one. And so, what always comes to my mind is, we can test and we can say, okay, the air quality is good, and that's based on what we have in the moment. That's based on what science has driven in that moment for us to test. I do have faith in whoever some of those on the ground scientists are in terms of what they're doing. A lot of the climate science is out of my wheelhouse in terms of when it gets down to all the compound stuff. But one of the things I do know, just being around river systems and creeks, riparian areas, is that it doesn't take much once it gets into that system. It can go everywhere, and then at the same time, you may have an instant measure of air quality is good, or just kind of that instant assurance. But what we don't know is the long-term effect.
Right.
Some of the people that were getting sick, was that because of how long they were exposed? We don't know. There were different houses that were being tested, but from what I could read, I couldn't tell when those houses were tested, or different stuff of that nature, where it's happening so fast and the information, they're trying to get information out, but also trying to not release everything so that they can make sure there's not a curveball. It's a difficult line to walk, because I keep sitting here the whole time going, man, like, what's the right move?
Right.
And because I do believe, I believe that, knowledge should be completely transparent in everything that we do. But at the same time, there's a level of trying to actually get things taken care of, which probably requires less coverage in the moment. But yeah, so I think in terms of like what you do is we kind of know like in the moment, you get that instant assurance, but we don't know the downstream effects. And it would be naive of us to think that what just happened is going to be resolved in a week, a month, several months, or a year, just because of, or from an environmental standpoint, just because when we're trying to see downstream effects, a lot of studies even have trouble with pesticides, trying to see what are the long-term effects, because funding gets involved. You only have so many years. You maybe only have a student for so long to study that aspect. So it'll be difficult. It's unfortunate because we can't solve the downstream effect without looking over time. So I think as a wildlife scientist or a surveyor, it's going to require a period of time where we're surveying that through time, not just looking at the quality of the air, but I mean, Josh briefly, or you had mentioned it to me the other day, but different measures of the environment, not just looking at the quality of the compounds, but looking at ecosystem indicators. So when I think of an ecosystem indicator, or how healthy, quote unquote, an ecosystem is looking at things such as biodiversity. So how many species are there? What's supposed to be there, and how many species are there? Same thing with community structure that I mentioned earlier. Has the community structure changed? I will say on the plus side, this presents a really cool opportunity if we want to look at the glass half full perspective. This presents an interesting opportunity to look at a before and after impact study design, where you could look at how things used to be, what's been recorded previously in the area, and then over time look at, okay, what's happened after the fact. And I think there was one thing I read that there was some, I think it was part of the plume, or it was some of the chemicals, I can't remember, but it had reached the Ohio River. But I had read what were some of the ways they were currently assessing the Ohio River, and it was a fish diversity index, which I thought was really neat. So fish or amphibians, anything that has to absorb stuff from the environment, are really good indicators of everything from air quality to water quality, in terms of making assessments. So I think having more studies on not just the quality, or assessing more than just the quality, but what's going on in the entire landscape, because it's all connected. It's all one giant puzzle piece.
Right.
Will benefit us in the long run. But
so it's going to take some time before.
Yeah.
Where you said, yeah, Josh, I was cutting you off.
Here, you go ahead, Alex. I think you're going to say the same thing I was saying, but I was just basically going to say that it's going to be a real long-term thing. It'll be probably 10, 15, 20 years before you really know some of the impacts. Obviously, you can know a little bit in the short term, but a lot of it's going to take time to understand and digest.
Right.
Yeah, that's what
you were going to say, Alex?
Too. Yeah, that's what I was going to go in and say. I was going to ask you, what do you think, like, health-wise? I don't know if, like, health-wise is the right or question to ask, but, like, when you see, like, livestock dropping or, like, fish in the water that are, like, coming up, I mean, how long before, like, if you're a person living in that area, do you think, John, that you feel safe eating, like, the food from around that area, or like, just doing your everyday activities in that area?
Right. So, at the end of the day, I would say, you can go by the EPA, so or the Environmental Protection Agency. They jump to the scene, and they're the ones who do all the assessments, and then they give the nationwide recommendation. So from that perspective, we should follow what the recommendation is. Personally, if I was out there, I don't, I can't recommend one way or the other. It'd probably be unethical of me to.
Right.
But I would say, just personally, I might be hesitant or I can understand the hesitancy in people. I was reading different. I also read today different. It was different like quotes from people that were at a public meeting, and they were nervous, and I think rightfully so, just because it's such a freak thing, and it seems that there's been some sort of disconnect in whatever's information is there. Right. So yeah, it's difficult. I do know, like, when these chemicals get into these water systems, there is a good chance that it can dilute down. I think that was kind of the main thought with the Ohio River. Mm-hmm. If you had wetlands, for example, wetlands are pretty good at filtering some of those toxic chemicals out. Mm-hmm. You do have to be careful because some chemicals, like out here in California, Gold Rush, they're still finding mercury in some of these wetlands that they were the wetlands were able to.
That's what I was going to ask you, if you ever ran into some of those scenarios in the wetlands, because I'm sure even with you said with like the pesticides, I'm sure it's fairly similar, but probably not to the extreme of the vinyl chloride, but.
Right. So I haven't done any in-depth, chemical assessments. Right. I have done water quality assessments. So I've used a probe, looked at everything from turbidity to dissolved oxygen in the water, and in terms of them saying the water's safe, they've gone and done the surveys. I think I saw today that they went and tested wells, which is mainly where a lot of our drinking water is coming from. That water's being cleaned and filtered through, and in different contexts. But they went and tested like 400 wells and didn't find any of the chemicals in the wells of those towns. Wow. Or of that town. But they did say they recommended people who were living off a private well to continue to drink bottled water until they could test those private wells. So it seemed as if the town had a good handle on what they knew in terms of their major source. And again, that's the recommendation is that that's safe. And, I would trust if they're surveying their wells, like they're putting out there and keeping everybody updated on, I think they have a website for that actually, mm-hmm. For the EPA, Ohio or whatever. But I do understand the hesitancy because you don't want to drink that chemical, especially something I used to teach my students at the U of A is, everybody has, or University of Arkansas, everybody has different perspectives and reasons as to why they may believe they want to do a certain choice or not, and how to be respectful of those decisions. And, someone who may have gotten sick all of a sudden may be more inclined to be hesitant to drink that water. And, and if we don't know, it seems like there's a lot of people getting sick, and or from the reports that I was able to see, and it seems as if though, it looked like I read from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources that it was like 3,500 fish were dead, but they didn't find any other wildlife that had been affected in the area right now. So that's based just the pure facts that I have seen out there. But of course, I don't live there, so I that's my limited knowledge that I've acquired from my own personal research on the topic, just to be in the know. But
yeah, it's been a pretty big deal out here. It's honestly become more of a big deal, I'd say, in the last week or two, because the first week or so, a lot of people didn't even realize it was happening still. But it was pretty. That was good. That was a good conversation there, but I want to make sure we get into some of the other questions here too. Kind of tying back to hunting. Not many people realize that hunting efforts and conservation efforts can be grouped into the same category. How crucial is hunting to a local ecosystem?
So, I would say, hunting is so important to ecosystems in general. We have different types of ecosystems, and hunting is so important because of the amount of dollars and then also the interest that's generated from it. A lot of people don't realize that. So, and I guess I'll start with the twofold. So first I'll kind of talk about hunting as a personal endeavor and why I enjoy doing it and why it's a part of my life, part of my culture, I would say. And then I'll talk about the second side of it, which is, how it's important on a large scale effort, why it's important to ecosystems. So, a lot of hunters are not out here because we like to kill things. We don't. I don't enjoy. I mean, I don't go out because I enjoy shooting something to kill it. I mean, that's not why I go. I go because it is a way for me to get really close to nature. It's a way for me to better understand the quarry, as we say. So knowing my quarry, it's a way for me to better understand it and kind of see how it ticks. So I'm, constantly when I'm hunting, I have to understand, what does that animal do? Why is it used to doing what it does? And, we always talk about the art of hunting is being able to fool that animal. And there's different ethics around, whether, for example, in duck hunting, it's like, I don't shoot a bird that landed in the decoys that's sitting on the water, because that was me not paying attention. That bird fooled me.
Right.
But if usually you're shooting a bird that's maybe, 3 to 5-ish feet above the decoys, if you, what we call finish a bird, so you're finishing that bird down, that's when you would shoot. Typically you don't shoot a bird when it's sky high, even if you think your gun can reach it and it's not, quote unquote, coming in to the decoys. So, there's a lot to it that generates the relationship I have with hunting, and I also get excited about the conservation. So as a hunter, I'm a part of a bigger effort and movement, especially with the nation, as a lot in how a lot of our dollars are generated, and a lot of how the laws were set in place to generate the dollars for the conservation of wildlife and different ecosystems. And then there's different wildlife that also benefit from that, not just the organism that I'm pursuing. So getting into that side of it, we have what we call the North American model. So the North American model was developed to help conserve wildlife. So I think about the passenger pigeon. If you ever go look up the passenger pigeon, there's this really cool story about it where that people could drive miles and never beat an entire flock, if that makes sense. So like a flock could be flying, you could start at one end and get to the other and still be driving miles and still be driving by them. We shot them to extinction. And so that's an example. There's also the bison examples, and about how we've, diminished their populations on the landscape. And so what happened was a lot of hunters that really cared about, they realized, oh my gosh, like we can have these major impacts and it can go away just like that. So hunters and anglers, so fishermen, came together and built this North American model. And it's basically a set of rules that allows people to enjoy the natural resource and to use that, but at the same time conserve it and ensure that if you're going to participate in it, you've got to understand that it's not about the take. I think my advisor says, be kind to the marsh; it'll be kind to you. So there's a side of that where hunters, especially today, are so passionate about the conservation side. So when I think about the dollars generating to wildlife habitat, one of my favorite things is the Pittman-Robertson Act for the U.S. And essentially, every time I purchase a gun, 11% of that sale goes to the Pittman-Robertson Fund. Every time I purchase ammo, I think it's about 10% goes to that. Of that, if I spend $30, 10% of that's going to go to the Pittman-Robertson Fund, and then that gets dispersed to the states for restoration projects, conservation projects, for a whole, and there's a whole system of hunter education. So making sure people are educated about this stuff. A lot of people think hunters just get a gun and go out there. No, you have to go through an education process. You have to get a hunter education card. You have to go out. Sometimes, depending on the course, you may be required to hunt with somebody for a certain amount of time before you can go out on your own. So there's different aspects of it that are regulated. Those funds generate a lot of habitat for wildlife in terms of either conserved habitat or restored habitat. And then I think about just the general sense of, you've got a lot of guys who, to take a lot of their own personal money and time to make habitat. Although they may be hunters and they may hunt some of it, I think about it, the ranch that I'm on, he was a former DU president, and he has 3,000 acres contiguously, which is like kind of crazy to think about. That I think about 2,200 of it is rice fields converted back into natural wetlands, and there's a good half of it that never gets hunted. And that's wetland habitat on private property for waterfowl. It's hard for me to see, just somebody who's not interested in hunting probably isn't going to spend the money to do a habitat restoration project on their property.
No, that's insane. And
so
it's pretty crazy too whenever you think about it. Like, people always bang on like the conservatives for not thinking or not being the type of people that want to reserve the land, but it's quite the opposite on the other hand, because they want everything that they buy conservatively for what they like to do. It goes back into the habitat, like you said, with purchasing a gun for hunting or going out and hunting, buying hunting permits, and realizing like all the amount of good that it does in the country to preserve the animals. And it is pretty crazy. Would you say that hunting waterfowl is probably your favorite though so far?
Right. So yeah, and it's
tough. That's a tough question.
I know if my friends were here, they would laugh because they would laugh because I can't go a day, I can't go a class without talking about it. It is, when I joke and say, like, I've moved away from saying sport because people talk about hunting, it's a sport. It is in many ways, but I've moved away from saying that because I've realized over time that waterfowl hunting is a deep rooted piece of my life. It's a cultural thing for me. I grew up in the duck capital of the world, which is Arkansas, and then I grew up not that far from Stuttgart, Arkansas, which is the official duck capital. It's where all the rivers converge, and all the birds that fly down those rivers all kind of end up there. For example, there's about 1.5 million mallards harvested in the Mississippi Flyway, and about 500,000 of those birds are harvested in Arkansas.
Wow.
Usually. And so there's a lot of duck hunters in that state that are very passionate about it. So I've grown up in that. All my friends hunted. We would go on Thanksgiving break back in Arkansas, and it was not uncommon for us to go every single day in high school because we were just so driven to do that. I remember at a young age, my buddy's mom would take us and drop us off places so we could go hunt before we could drive a car. Because we were just so pumped to be out there to do that, which also generated a lot of the questions that I had going when I was slowly getting into college, and as I was through high school meeting people, started kind of lit a spark in my life in terms of why I'm interested in wildlife science. So I do focus in waterfowl and wetlands, and that's really because I like to research everything, and I recognize that it's all related, but waterfowl and wetlands hold a soft spot in my heart because I grew up in that culture. I have guns handed down to me that my grandfather used to shoot, who's not around anymore, but there's a piece of that wherever I'm hunting, I'm getting to use that gun that's been around for a very long time. You're right. You're also trying to figure out an animal that's traveled hundreds of miles, and sometimes people will shoot a banded duck that's lived up to 10 years old, and it's amazing to do that because you're like, wow, this thing was able to live for 10 years and avoid people for that, for like 20 different or 10 different winter migrations, and then also go back up in the spring. And so I think that's what makes it interesting. There's a whole duck call industry, and there's a whole duck stamp art industry. There's people that are into duck hunting with dogs and that whole competition side of it. So there's all these different types of hunters that come together in the waterfowl work, and then especially you have the science heads like me that also is their own little group that really enjoys doing the hunting and then doing the science.
There's a lot of
favorite.
Communities in it then. That's incredible.
Huge communities.
Right.
I know we've been sending back and forth some of the reels the different content creators have been putting out there with the duck hunting. There's a lot of lot of interest in it. So it's kind of cool to see.
Right.
One of the things that my friends, Alex and some of my other friends, have been talking about a lot lately is a lot of us seem to have this feeling when we go in nature, in the woods, of like feeling alive and feeling fulfilled. And we kind of have been tying it back and forth with like the effects of technology and what this constant cycle of like scrolling on your phone, on TikTok, on Instagram, Snapchat, all of the different apps, how that can actually be very damaging over time. And this new generation may not, we're basically the last generation to grow up experiencing life as a kid without technology, because it kind of came along right after we matured. Would you agree with some of that stuff, where do you think we've kind of lost touch with our roots as a society in general?
Right. So I would think, this is definitely a tough question because, in terms of when I think about lost touch with roots, I think sometimes it's difficult to think about because everybody's roots are different. If I think about even a year difference, I was talking about this with a manager the other day. There were some policies being put in with the salmon out here, or had been put in, about the different CFS flows, and he was telling me about his experiences as a kid with the salmon, but that the people that were recommending and doing some of the work had a different baseline. And I thought that was pretty interesting to think about because, it's always going to evolve, right? So I think everybody has a little bit different type of root that collectively comes together as, for this diverse nature of society that we have in some regards from purely an experience perspective. So I do think that when I think about the technology side of things, I think that it's constantly evolving. I think we constantly have a new normal of society with that technology. I think that there are pros and cons to it. I think that, if you think about the cons of it, is that, growing up in that technological era. So I joke, I don't think I had a cell phone until I was probably 7th-ish or 8th grade. And I've seen, and now you've got babies with iPads now. And
exactly.
I know it's, and it's funny, and I think it's easy. I think it's easy to fall into the trap of, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe that baby has an iPad, or like that kid's got a cell phone and they're 7 years old. I think it's easy to fall into that trap just because it's a different experience than we had. But at the same time, I think that there's also some benefits to that. So in terms of, from our perspective, to adapt to it. So when I think about like TikTok and Instagram, the kind of the pros of being able to have that now is that, I can post a TikTok video tomorrow. It actually happened to my friend today, my friend Sylvie today, or yesterday, I guess. She'd posted a TikTok video and it was getting 10,000 views per every 10 minutes or something. And so it's like blowing up. So like, I laugh because, we didn't live in a society where we had that much opportunity to be able to expand. I even think like this podcast, right? Like the opportunity to be able to come on here and talk about wildlife and hunting. I may never get to reach that many people in the past. And it's also cool that maybe there's younger people watching this kind of stuff. And maybe, changing the fold, also educating people earlier on different things that could have been issues in our time frame. Now, you do run the risk, like you said, you were talking about I think you were talking about like the dopamine thing, dopamine overload. I think you do run the danger of social media today. The one thing it supplies, so when I think about a human from a survival perspective, is that, hormonally, like dopamine is a reward trigger for us. And so likes and follows is, we like to be seen publicly as a good figure. Like we like to see that people like us. And so when you have likes and follows, sometimes that triggers that. And for some people, it can, have them use it too much. As with anything, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. So you do run that risk, but I also see some really good opportunities there. Do I think it's taken us away from nature. I think it can in ways. I think it, because it might be easier for you to go watch a YouTube video or a TikTok than go get in your car and go drive to wherever it is. Not to say that stops everybody, but I think that there are those venues to disconnect from nature. But I think also when we get into nature, we kind of realize, or for me anyways, when you kind of unplug or are focused on something else, you're like, wow, like it's nice to not have that overstimulation of so much information and different types of information. We weren't hardwired to watch something super sad and then watch something super funny in the next video when we're scrolling through reels like that. I think that's why people get stressed and anxious. There's a whole slew of psychological studies on this stuff that's really interesting. But
do you think?
Probably the long-winded answer.
No, it's good
to
hear.
Perfect.
It's good to hear from a guy that's out in nature. I was going to ask you, do you think there's something to say for the parents out there that are kind of like-minded in your sense, where they have this appreciation for nature and all that it offers? And do you think that there's something in getting your kid involved early in like the process of fishing and hunting and hiking and camping to like appreciate that in an early stage?
Right. So I definitely think there is. I think it's so important that kids get involved. I think the difficult barrier is that not every parent had that experience, and they don't have the arsenal to be able to take them out to do those things, or they may not know the right people. Here at UC Davis, my advisor puts a hunt camp on every fall, and it was designed to take kids who had never been hunting before, never had that hunting experience. And there's a few. I have a student in my cohort that she is a hunting badass now, but she basically was an anti-hunter before that camp, and she said that she thought it was going to be a bunch of bogus. And what kind of info are they going to feed me? And after she went and experienced it, it changed her mind on what she thought about hunting and how important it was. And now she hunts. She has a relationship with a hunter. It's pretty funny how, especially like, if you were at a younger age, if you had received that information, it might be also easier to kind of, building up inherent norms of making things okay in your mind, or seeing kind of the greater picture. Education is always great. Anytime there's an opportunity to educate somebody on something, the earlier the better, the more the better. But yeah, I think trying to find ways for kids to get involved. I think if you don't know, never be afraid to ask. I think one of the best ways to ask would be like call your local Department of Natural Resources or call your local game and fish agency and say, hey, like I have a kid, I don't have a fishing pole or I don't have a gun, I don't know what to do, but I want to take my kid hunting. They're either probably going to have a program. I know some of them rent decoys out and rent fishing poles out. Some of them have fishing derbies with experienced anglers so kids can fish. And sometimes these people a lot of hunters and fishermen are so passionate about what they do. They're not afraid to say, oh, we don't have a program right now that's going to be quick in this time frame, but I'll take you myself. So there's a lot of people that are willing to help. So I would say definitely don't be afraid to ask, but
that's a solid answer. I mean, you being someone that grew up in being around it, fishing and hunting, and having the opportunity that my dad and my uncles like all brought me a part of, and like you said, sometimes you might not have the opportunity if you're not raised up around it. So there's definitely resources to reach out and find a way to encompass it. I know you were talking a little bit earlier about the carrier pigeon now and the extinction and how in a country, whenever we first got here, we kind of went buck wild with how we hunted and how we went about tracking animals, collecting furs, and the whole 9 yards. I'm curious to listen to your opinion on what's going on recently in like recent news with some of the cloning that's going on. So in terms of like species like the mastodons and mammoths, they're literally talking about potentially recloning them so that they're back in the wild. I'm curious to ask you if you think this is a good thing, if it's easy to encompass into the ecosystem, the whole 9 yards.
Right. So I think a lot of, and there may be multiple projects going around that I'm unaware of, but the one that comes to mind, and this is probably the one that's referring to, so a lot of with the mammoth work, essentially what they're trying to do is take DNA from a woolly mammoth that's preserved in ice. So they've gotten that DNA and they're trying to infuse that with DNA or an embryo from a close relative, and I want to say, don't quote me, but I want to say it's a Japanese elephant. So essentially, what it is it's gonna, the thought process is that it won't be a woolly mammoth, but it'll be this hairy elephant, if that makes sense. So it won't quite be the same thing. I think that's where sometimes people get confused, because a lot of people will say, "Oh my gosh, look at, they're going to bring back mammoths," and I think that they haven't cracked that code yet. But that's kind of what I've seen. What's happening? The theory behind a lot of it is that we hunted a lot of megafauna to extinction. So I think of like mammoths. I think of you think about like I'm blanking on them. I think you had talked about the short-faced bear. There was some different ones we were talking about, or briefly over email. But in Russia they're wanting to do something called Pleistocene Park. There's the idea that bringing back these megafauna will restore the ecosystem there. So specifically with the mammoth, it's the mammoth steppe ecosystem. So the mammoth was thought to be, this big organism that would graze out there and also would walk around and mash the ground down to where there was all these, the grass, the plants that would come about were all these grasses. And, as a result, when we think about, downstream effects, there's a plethora of native wildlife or wildlife that would live there too as a result. So the idea is that when we remove the mammoth, that ecosystem changes, because the plants community is going to change, the wildlife community is going to change as a result. So that's kind of like the idea. This totes a tough line, because, and we talk about this a lot in my wetland classes, restoration versus conserving what's already there. Restoration ecology is pretty neat, because it's the idea of, okay, what's the problem? What can we do? Who's the stakeholders involved, and can we really achieve what used to be there? Can we really take a management regime from our own hands and implement the same power that used to be there? And has it rapidly changed so much that we really wouldn't be able to achieve what used to be there? And we don't know until we try it. So as much limited information that I know is that there's a scientist that believes that if we restore the megafauna there in Siberia, that it could slow the melting that's going on out there, and some of the different climate change effects. I don't know all the intricacies of the different networks of that system. But the difficult piece is, you have to go through several steps to be able to introduce the mammoth. So it's getting some of the natives back in there, and when I say mammoth, that I guess
he'll be a hairy elephant.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So getting them, right. So getting them back getting it to a spot where you could reintroduce them. But then you'd have to, the tough part that I see with a lot of this is, not saying you couldn't do it and study it, but climate studies are pretty tough. I know a lot. I've worked with temperature data, looking at waterfowl over a 40-year period, and even that data was spotty. And we would take averages among years, trying to look at different things, and just because climate data is like this, it's like all over the place. a lot of times when you run a model to statistically study this stuff, there's certain assumptions so we call them assumptions, is how the data has to look for the model to be like, okay, you can rely on me, essentially. Right. If the data if the square doesn't match the circle, you may not be able to rely on that model. So you can do different things to make that data turn into the circle that fits the model. And so what's difficult with climate data is it's all over the place. It doesn't really ever fit some of the models that we try to run. So we have to do different things with it to get the best idea we can. But I know that some climate scientists even have trouble upwards of 100 years worth of data thinking about strictly temperature and weather data. So when I think of, implementing these megafauna into a system like that, you're going to have to study for a very long time to really see if there's some large effects, because you're gonna have swings, and I think that's what sometimes gets people from when I think about getting information out to the public, what can be confusing is you're gonna have you may have a couple of hot years, drought years, and then all of a sudden you have a wet year, and then you have maybe a few more wet years, and it goes to a hot year again, and so it's all over the place. That everybody has different baselines again and has different experiences. And if I think about that stretch of time, that's 10 years of someone's life. So, what NOAA, so the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration will do is they run these super complicated models over a long time frame, and they're developing an average line or an average trend through that data. And it's really difficult to achieve. But they've got climate scientists that dedicate their whole life to this stuff. So thinking about doing it's going to take a lot
There's a lot of work that needs to be done.
I don't know.
Is what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, right. And there's, we think about the same thing too with trophic cascade. So a trophic cascade is basically the idea that, and this is a controversial one that's kind of fun to think about, but trophic cascades are the idea that, I have different levels of feeding groups. I have predators, I may have grazers, and then I may have, plants. And so if I remove the predator, the grazer is going to graze too much of the plants, and then that ecosystem health is going to decline rapidly. But if I reintroduce the predator, it keeps the grazers low or to a stable level to where the community structure of that ecosystem can remain at a stable level, and then all the wildlife that benefit downstream may be able to stay there, so you have an increased biodiversity. It's typically a trend. So the controversial ones, the wolves in Yellowstone, and they're talking about in different states doing it. But there's a lot of controversy on whether it actually works or not, and that it may have worked at one time, and whether or not it actually works now. And there's a whole slew of studies to look into that. People that have researched it their whole life. And then people always come up with different arguments as to why that's different from this system. And so, there definitely needs to be more work done on that. I think downstream, ultimately, that yes, removing them has changed the landscape, but I can't really put my finger on if we put them back, is it going to work? I think that requires more study to really understand those mechanisms that are driving those relationships.
Yeah, of course.
Oh yeah, pretty wild stuff to think about, for sure. I think let's do like one or two more questions. Then we could try the card game or the pull a card or something if you want, if we have time.
Yeah.
We're already at like an hour 15, so we're rolling.
We're rolling. Yeah, dude. I'm sorry. I was out over here talking about animals.
No, you're good. It's been.
But you mentioned Yellowstone too, and I was about to really start rolling because I started watching that. I binged that whole entire freaking show in about like a month, and I'm on season 5, and they just showed the clip of the wolves with the collar around their neck and how they're tracked through Yellowstone Park. And then I was like, I wonder if that's like a real thing in real life, and I searched it up, and that is like a cult in itself. The people that follow it, like, buy the shirts of the wolves and everything like that. I'm like, this is awesome. It's really cool.
Yeah. Here, let's just do we'll pull a card now. I'll get Alex in here. We'll do a card, and then we'll do like a follow-up closing question, and then we'll be good to go. But Yellowstone, dude, I want to go get a place
Literally.
in Montana. Some acreage, you know, do some cool videos.
It's a really, really cool place.
Alex is on.
Oh, he's back. All right.
I don't know what the heck happened. Like, I hit some random button and it like quit. It recorded automatically for me, and then it quit, and then it kicked me out and said I had to pay for like the rest of the recording. I don't know what the hell happened, but I ain't trying to spend money tonight, you know?
Yeah, no, you can't be spending no money.
I know.
But
I was like,
this game is, I gotta get the front from our friends. How deep will you go? I guess their actual name. You've seen it on TikTok. Their actual name is
What am I in for?
to achieve you. Nothing. Basically, the goal is there's 3 different categories. We pick a card randomly, and then there's a question on it. And it's a lot of them can be like deep questions, or they can be not as deep questions about like life in general. So we've been trying to play for each episode since I got it, which is only like one episode, but they're pretty interesting questions. So I'm just gonna.
I'm taking a leak super quick, boys. You keep going. I'm hopping. I'm
don't fall in, Mullen.
All right, you come back.
I'll let you know what the question is.
Don't fall in.
All right, let's go level 2. Oh, let's not do that one. I gotta find a good one.
Huh.
Ooh. Alright, so this one is, what's a chance that you wish you took?
A chance that I wish I took.
You might have to think for a second, but Alex, you got any?
Nope.
I guess I have one. It's tough because I genuinely value my past experience to what I'm doing now. But I think one thing I regret not doing sooner was in kind of my journey to what I get to do now. I always joke that like what I do now, I wouldn't change it for the world. Once I get off this podcast, I'm going back to working on a manuscript for another study, and it's because a lot of people. I think it's a difficult thing because there's some people that just don't enjoy the writing, and I and it's maybe not necessarily all about the writing for me, but it's I just am so driven to do more wildlife research that that carries me through day to day. So when I think about that, what a lot of people don't recognize, I guess this gets into kind of some of my history with wildlife science, is that I grew up a big hunter, big outdoorsman, big fisherman, and then I went to college. And one of the things that I went to a school that was what some people call a medical school feeder. So basically a school that has, a lot of med students coming out of it. My classes were very tough. It was the first time in my life where I just remember feeling like I didn't know how to study for things. I was struggling. I remember my freshman first semester, I also played football in college. So that was another aspect of my life that was very, new and difficult, trying to time manage. But what I did was I stuck with, I was doing this medical school track thing because I had kind of believed in my mind that, this is the path. This is the known path. You're going to go through 4 years of college, apply to med school, get to med school. You'll have a good life. That was kind of the thought initially. And so I went through taking immunology, biochemistry, organic chemistry 1 and 2, all the physics classes, the stuff that I don't use on a daily basis, but that were very difficult courses that I wouldn't have taken had I decided to do the wildlife stuff. And it would poke its way out. So like when I had to do research for med school, it's not required, but it looks good. I remember asking my I guess they would have been like an academic advisor for pre-med style stuff. I had said, does it have to be in, clinical style research, or, a lot of my friends were doing study abroad, doing medical research, or working with cancer cells in a lab. And that at the time was just, I've grown an appreciation now from the wildlife side, but at the time was not, I was really into behavioral stuff. And I was also a minor in psychology. So like, I think there are little times where that stuff would kind of poke its way out. that was unavoidable because that's what's interested me since I was a young kid. So I think like deep down, I wish I would have taken that chance sooner of not being afraid. And I think at a young age, you think that everything has to be figured out. It's very image focused. So, everybody's trying to go to med school. Everybody that's on med school track is, everybody has a known path, and you want to feel like you have a known path. And I think that's where it's difficult, because when you don't know something, that's where the mind starts to play tricks on you, because you don't really understand what's coming next. But if you trust your gut, you'll win 100% of the time. So I wish I would have taken that chance sooner. And but I do value that experience. It made me who I am today in terms of I persevere a lot. I made that change a year after college. I took a year off to kind of really get deep-rooted experience in the medical field, and kind of found out that I was leaning towards the wildlife stuff a little bit more, and then it took off immediately. In terms of there was some hardships in terms of there were difficult struggles getting involved, but once the door was left open, I took off running and didn't stop.
That's awesome.
So.
Exactly. No, I think that's big, and I think that'll resonate a lot with our audience, which is a lot of like college age or mid-20-year-old men and women. Alex, the question was, what's a chance you wish you took?
Oh,
that you did?
Yeah. Have you been thinking on yours? I'm going to think on mine a little bit. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, I have mine. So
I've been thinking on mine too. I don't got an answer yet.
Josh, do you think?
Mine pretty much is the same as similar to John's. Obviously, we're doing completely different things, but wish that I started earlier, because if I would have started doing the filmmaking or the photography in high school, or even right when I got into college, could have been even faster trajectory to where I am now, which has still been a fast trajectory. But and I think it could also tie into something like this podcast. High school me would never be like, I'm going to go on camera and record myself talking, or put so much of my life like out in public. I didn't even have social media, I don't think, till after my freshman year of college, really, which was kind of unusual for people our age. But so yeah, I think just kind of embrace that earlier, start doing the photography and the videography stuff earlier, but it's just kind of the way it goes.
I agree. That's kind of mine on that note too, Josh, right. Where it's like, it's the same thing with me, where you do wish you started earlier, but you're kind of glad that you went through what you went through, because it's like hindsight's 20/20 at this point.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, maybe caring less about what people are kind of thinking about you. I think over the past 4 years being at college, really finding myself and what makes myself happiest and what I enjoy to do is, most important to me. And then the people that you're really close to is what really matters the most, and not everybody that's on your phone, everybody that's on Instagram, everybody that's on any social site. And it matters at your core, what you're happiest with and what you enjoy to do. So it's probably my answer there.
Oh yeah, that's huge. Alex, you got anything?
Not really. I mean, here's one. I wish I'd started hanging out with Mullen more. I mean, freshman year, he got me right. Like, he makes the best pizza in New Wilmington. Sorry, Pizza Joe's. He makes good drinks. Like, oh my god, like,
oh yeah.
John, if you get up here, I'm gonna have him make us an apple cider with Fireball. It's
fire.
Yeah.
I think that time is coming.
The college drinks are past you, John. We have a fun time.
He got me. He gets me into the parties.
You've been having a time this semester.
Yeah, the whole year. I mean, yeah.
We've been taking care of Alex up around these parts.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's great.
Well, let's go to our closing question here, and I guess that would be, what message would you give to a young person who's thinking about chasing their dreams like you did, either in the same field or any other field, but particularly this field?
Right. So, I've thought about this a lot in terms of just like, I always joke about like, what would John now tell young John? And that, I guess that would be like to, go with your heart. If your heart is telling you like, I like to fish, or I like to be on camera, I like to play a sport, don't, I hear people say, oh, well, that's not going to work out because of this, that's not going to work out because of that. Don't get into that mentality. Yes, it's important to be realistic at times in terms of like, what your strengths are and how you can use that to your advantage. Yes, that's important eventually, but at the end of the day, if you have heart in it, you're going to work harder than the person that doesn't in the hardest moments, and you're going to excel in those moments. And so I always joke. I say, some of the greatest singers and musicians of all time are really good at what they do because they not only play an instrument, they play an instrument with their heart. So finding that instrument, whatever that instrument is, and playing it as hard as you can and as much as you want. And then, the other thing I would say is that doesn't mean it's going to be easy all the time. You're going to have hard moments that are going to change you as a person for the better in terms of learning. So, we always learn and we become better at life and different situations through uncomfortable situations. And one of the things my parents used to always tell me was, when I have a stressful moment or something, unfortunate happened that was like stressful, was, my mom used to always say, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and dust yourself off. My dad used to always say, grab the bull by the brass ring. So,
they're in the
bull,
front.
They would have a brass ring around their nose. And the idea, I love those two quotes from them because the thought behind that is that, you're going to get knocked down like a bull rider might. You're going to get knocked down all the time. And it may be embarrassing in that moment, but it's that moment. You got to get up, you got to walk off, you got to think about the next thing. And then grabbing the bull by the brass ring means is that a bull, if you grab a bull by the brass ring, that sucker's going to be kicking around, bucking around, and you don't know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, but all you can do in that moment is hold on to that brass ring. And in that process, you're going to learn to adapt and adjust and come out on top, if you want to keep holding it. And that's where the heart comes back in. So if I could tell somebody that has a certain dream or something to really, really, follow those things and don't take no for an answer, keep going. You're going to find what works.
I love that analogy with the instrument, man. That was right on. I'm going to keep that one. Find your instrument and play it. That's incredible. I never heard that, but that's seriously great.
There you go.
That's actually that's awesome. Really good.
We seriously appreciate you coming on, John, and taking time out of your busy day. Like you said, you got to go back and write some papers, but seriously, thank you. My mind is open now to the wetlands and everything waterfowl wise, and it was definitely a great talk. So we appreciate you coming on tonight. Yes,
we got to get a duck hunting. Sometime.
Yeah. come out here. California's fun. I'm slowly learning the landscape on that. But it's a little different than in Arkansas. But if it doesn't happen here, get you to come to Arkansas and we can make it happen.
Sounds like it would be a blast.
There, but yeah, definitely.
And good food too.
Yeah, they got good food.
Oh yeah.
Big cakes, baby.
There you go. Great
parties. It'll put Los Amigos to shame.
But thank you guys, seriously.
But yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for having me. And if y'all ever want to talk again, my phone's always open.
Definitely.
You guys can always call me, chat about stuff.
Once you get out of school, man. Once you get out of school and you're out there, we're definitely having you back on again for sure. Before that, even.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But
yeah, right.
Awesome.
Either or.
Well, we appreciate it, John.
Awesome. Thank you. We appreciate it.